Okay, so welcome everybody to the Child Care Stipend for Foster Parents and Relative Caregivers training. What we will be covering during this webinar includes a new ORA rule, which will be covered by our expert here, Donna Haney. We will go over 2 new forms that you will use in this process. We will cover how to determine if a child care provider is licensed or is listed with SelfSufficiency or is approved through conversation with foster care certifiers. And finally, we will go from beginning to end through the child care stipend workflow. By completing this webinar, we hope that you will be able to identify the branch responsibilities as well as the responsibilities of the parent, of the foster parent or relative caregiver, determine if a child care provider has an active license or is listed with SSP or has been approved by their certifier, that you will be able to locate and complete the necessary forms to authorize a child care stipend for a foster parent or relative caregiver, and finally that you can identify resources available to assist you with this as we start this process here today, May 1st. So I'm going to hand over to Donna Haney right now to talk about the changes to our rules.
So as I'm sure you all are aware, child care for working foster parents and our relative caregivers has been an issue for a long time. And we are now at a point where the department is able to provide some assistance for our providers for the cost of child care. This assistance, however, is limited and requires oversight. What we're going to talk about in this webinar is that oversight and why this webinar, as Rebecca said, is recorded and will be on iLearn so that folks who haven't seen it or want to refer back to it, the information will be there. A transmittal also went out on April 27th with the procedure for child care and the forms that we will be going over today. We're sending information out to foster parents via email and through their social media websites. We also have a flyer that you will receive with this PowerPoint after the webinar. This flyer can be shared with foster parents and other partners to get the word out. That would be helpful. So I'm going to be talking now about the responsibilities for the branch, for foster parents, and when we can authorize the payments. So the caseworker for the child must determine that the child care plan meets the supervision needs of the child. And then a designated branch staff need to verify that the child care provider is licensed, approved, or listed, which we will describe in more detail. And then branch staff approve the authorization, and the authorization is then reauthorized each 6 months. So who can we use as a child care provider? So a foster parent is the one that's going to identify an appropriate child care provider. They can use somebody who's out there licensed, approved through the Office of Child Care. They can also use a child care provider who is listed through SSP. But if they want to use somebody that is known to the family, known to the child, and is approved through certification, we can also use them and they will still receive the stipend.
So I just want to point out, I see, Alicia, that you've typed in a question. Will this PowerPoint be sent to the participants of this training? Yes, it will, and we will be sending that to participants from previous sessions. You're welcome to share that with other people who didn't attend today, and we'll find some way to make that available to folks who might take this recording on iLearn. So great question, and we certainly will make that available. So sorry, Donna, to interrupt there. I did just want to address that question right then.
No, that's great. And let me just emphasize the certifier's responsibility in approving a child care provider that's not otherwise licensed isn't new. This is part of the work they do currently. So we decided that because it can take some time for a provider to become listed, that we were going to go ahead and qualify those folks to receive the stipend. It's important to note that those folks that will do that type of child care only provide care for the foster child or other children of the foster parent. there's somebody that would not be required to become licensed through the Office of Child Care.
Awesome.
Oh, and then the foster parent, after identifying the appropriate child care, completes an authorization form, and that's the CF-162, and that has to be done for each child. And we'll be going over that form. And then each month, the foster parent submits an invoice. The foster parent pays the child care provider and then submits an invoice to the branch to be reimbursed, and that reimbursement is up to $375.
And we'll continue talking about these things, especially the forms, as we go through this webinar, but does anybody have any questions on these particular responsibilities yet, as you may be one of those people that helps explain this to the foster parent? So as Donna said, there will be emails sent out. There are points and information posted on a foster parent website, but not everybody may hear about this. And so, Robbie, I see your question there. Is this $375 per child? Well, you know, that's a brilliant question, and that leads us into our next slide.
Very good segue. So this is when we can, as a department, issue a child care stipend. It is for foster children under the age of 6. So once that child turns 6, at this point, that foster parent will not receive the child care stipend. The stipend is a maximum of $375 per month per foster child. We do not look at the income of the foster parent. Income is irrelevant. The child care stipend is, however, specific to working foster parents. The purpose and the need for the child care is for the caregiver's need to maintain employment. Again, we have to make sure that the daycare plan meets the child's supervision needs, and the child care provider needs to meet the criteria that we will go over in more detail, but they need to be licensed or approved or listed.
Great points. And I see that there are some people adding some comments or questions, so we'll hold here for a second. Okay, so do they have to be full-time employed? Great question.
They do not have to be full-time employed. We all know, or those of us who have ever used child care know, that $375 is not going to cover the cost of full-time child care for a young child. They only need to have the need for child care because they work. So if it's 20 hours of work that 20 hours a week that they work, or 15 hours a week that they work, we will still reimburse them up to $375. If the cost of their child care is $200, then we would reimburse them the $200.
Thanks for clarifying that. And that leads us to the points where we are not able to authorize child care stipends.
So it's sort of the flip of what I just said, but I think it's important to emphasize that children over the age of 5 do not qualify for this new process. It has to be where the foster parent or relative caregiver is unavailable to care for the child due to work. We can't use the child care provider. We can't reimburse the cost to a foster parent for a child care provider that we haven't somehow either verified is licensed or approved ourselves. We can only do the initial approval for 6 months. We need to reauthorize it each 6 months. And this child care process begins today, right?
Mm-hmm.
May 1st.
Yes, May 1st.
So any child care, if something gets approved this month, we can reimburse the foster parent this month, but we cannot reimburse them for any cost of care that they had in April or March.
So Donna, Sarah asked, do foster parents have to provide receipts for the reimbursement? And if so, to whom do they provide that?
It's a great question. And we're going to get to a invoice that you're going to see, and that is what they will provide to the caseworker. And so if you want to hold for 1 second on that thought, we're going to get there. You're just smart and you know what's coming.
Absolutely. I like all the segues here. However, I do want to pause for just a second. Is there any other participant who has any questions or comments specifically around either the branch responsibilities, the foster parent responsibilities, or when this can or cannot be authorized? We just quickly went over several of those points, and I want to make sure that we leave room here for questions. And your questions are supporting those people who will be watching this later as a recording as well. So if you have that question, I'm sure somebody else has that question as well, and so we want to make sure to leave that space for those comments and questions. And as we mentioned before we started our recording, we have already updated the process a little bit based on questions previous sessions had. So Lisa, I see you said specifically one, the child is 6 years old, they may no longer receive a stipend.
And that is true at this point.
So 5.99, yes to a stipend. Once they turn 6, like midnight of the day they turn 6 years old, that stipend would end. And Deborah, I see from Douglas, you said you have multiple people attending in groups. That's great. Jen, you ask, is there something that will require approval from a supervisor before payment is processed? Listen to you. Yes, that is our next point. So when we go into the form, stay tuned for the answer to that question. And Kiku, if a parent is going to school, is the stipend available? I appreciate you asking that question, and Donna has some specific information about that.
Unfortunately, at this point, school does not qualify for the stipend. I think it's a great question, and I think it should keep being asked. But right now, we're sticking with employment. We do plan on reviewing this program in a few months to see, what the use is, what the cost is, that sort of thing, and perhaps we'll be able to make some changes. I don't know, but that's a great question. But unfortunately, right now, the answer is not going to be qualified if someone is a student.
And I know that Donna has done some advocacy trying to get that as part of the stipend, so we'll stay tuned to see if that's something that can be made part of this program, but we appreciate you asking that question. I see another question, is the age limit due to the child starting to attend school at the age of 6? Do we have any specific information around that?
Yes, I think 6, it went to 6 because of school. We know that children in elementary school still require childcare, but this was a way to start a program that we've tried to start for years and years and years and didn't have the budget, didn't have the support. So this is not something that is covers all foster parents and all children and all costs of childcare, but it's a step in the right direction.
So I think that speaks to Robbie's question too. What if the child is over 6 but has disabilities? It sounds like because right now we're limiting this to a specific population, that unfortunately the stipend would not extend to children over the age of 6, even with disabilities, but there might be other programs available to help with that. I just don't know that that falls under this one.
That's accurate. Again, right now it's a hard and fast 6 years old, regardless of the needs of that particular child for the stipend. Of course, they can still go to child care and they go to services that benefit them, but at this moment we're looking at those babies, toddlers, and preschoolers.
And Brandy, I see your question there. Do the foster parents have to be approved prior to today to be eligible for the stipend? And maybe this is a good time to move on to those forms where we'll talk about that. But what I'm hearing is that for at least the month of May, there will be some flexibility around when that authorization is signed.
Yes, if the authorization that Rebecca's going to go over with these forms is approved in the month of May, they can receive the payment for the month of May. Moving forward, and they then can be approved for 6 months going forward. So we understand that this is just coming out fast now, and people can't retroactively, get this approval done. So just if it's done this month, they can receive the reimbursement.
And then Megan and Shannon, I see your question. If the daycare provider isn't currently listed in IIS, is the certifier able to approve the daycare provider like the respite process? And I believe, Donna, that was what you were mentioning in the foster care parent responsibilities part, or the branch responsibilities?
So I want to make sure that I have this question correct. So if there's a foster parent and they identify, let's say, their sister to provide childcare. In fact, maybe today, last month, the month before, their sister was providing that childcare already. We just weren't providing a reimbursement or a stipend to help cover those costs. And so they're not listed through self-sufficiency because that wasn't something that would have benefited them prior. Yes. So the short answer is yes. What should have already happened is the certifier would have approved them to provide that child care because they weren't licensed or listed. That's already required in our certification rules. So yes, they can now, those folks that they're exempt from being required to be licensed by the Office of Child Care. They're only providing care for those foster parents' children. They can receive the stipend. The foster parent can receive a stipend. And we're going to go over the forms, and it'll be a little bit different for those folks, but the short answer is yes.
All right, one or two more comments, and then we'll dive into the forms. So Tamara, you said, do we pay the foster parent or the provider? Just to clarify one more time, we're going to specifically pay the foster parent because our understanding is that the foster parent is already paying the provider. So this is a reimbursement, a stipend to the foster parent for payments they have already made to the provider. It's only for daycare that has already been provided.
Or paid for. Once the foster parent incurs the cost, they can get the reimbursement from us. So, and the next question I see is about forms, and maybe we should just go into the forms and see if we can get to Megan and Shannon's question.
Great. So yes, we are looking at CF 0162, and that's the form on the left, authorization, and we'll go through that in more detail, as well as forms 501F. And I did add that forms web page at the bottom in case you need that, although it should be favorites on your internet browser. Alicia, you noted, so for May, foster parent can be approved within any time in May, but for future months, do they need prior month's approval first? Is that something that's still being discussed?
No. If they're approved in the month, they can be reimbursed for that month moving forward. But remember, if you're approving somebody in May, you can approve them for 6 months. But if somebody is certified in July and they're going to use somebody, we can go ahead and reimburse them for the month of May, or that month of July if they get approved in July. And the reason we're looking at doing it this way is because we're very well aware that $375 doesn't cover the cost of a month of child care. So we want to be flexible and give them the support at least that we can. Now, if we got to a point where we were paying the entire cost of child care, we might have to be a little more stringent about when did the child care start and, you know, when was it approved. But for now, yes, it just needs to be approved in the month. And that may take me clarifying that in the procedure or the rule moving forward, but we're going to be fine.
And this will be evaluated at some point, so we might see this get a little bit more fine-tuned, but what I'm hearing from Donna right now is that at least going forward for the next few months, it can be authorized at any point within that first month, and that month will count. So looking at that first form, this is the authorization form, CF0162. You can find that in the forms drive right now, and there are different portions of this. It may be hard to see this, but you could also go into your web browser and pull that up and review the form on your own as well. But there are different sections that are intended to be completed by different people. So this middle section here is information that would be gathered from the foster parent. Now the foster parent could complete this themselves, or they could work with the caseworker in order to complete this, but we need to know for which child it is, the foster parent's name, who their employer is, whether they are employed full-time or part-time, and there is a section for more than one caregiver if there are 2 certified foster parents. Also, we're gathering information on, do they receive ERDC for this child? It was something that I learned in preparing for this training, that there are some foster parents who receive employment-related daycare for foster children. So if they are receiving that benefit, we need to have that captured on this authorization form, and that would not count towards the amount that would qualify for the stipend. However, as Donna has mentioned, and you likely know, child care can be very expensive, and likely the amount they're receiving for ERDC does not cover the full child care amount. So any amount above and beyond that ERDC payment would be qualified for the stipend as long as it meets the other conditions. So in that middle section where it says, mark any of the following services the child is currently receiving, we are trying to capture information about ERDC, if they're attending Head Start or any other pre or kindergarten program. Additionally, we need the child care provider's license number and provider name and address. If for some reason the foster parent doesn't have the child care provider license number, that is something we can look up, and we'll show you those screens and how you could capture that information in this training just a little bit later. Finally, the foster parent is going to sign and date this, and I'm going to ask Nanda just really quickly what are the other points about the foster parent information on here before I move on to the other parts.
Well, for one, if the foster parent choice of childcare is that sister that I brought up a minute ago, and they're not going to have a license or they're not going to have a number, so you can just put in per certification, and that certifier should email just a brief note to the caseworker that this is approved, and that can be put in the case file of the child. We do have on this form some information about Head Start programs and
pre-kindergarten
programs, and we just want to remind everybody that those are available for our foster children. They may meet the need of the child care. It may not, depending on if the foster parent works full-time or not. We're also aware that Head Start programs are full often, and so our kids get put on waiting lists. And we also know that it's a short period of time during the day, so if somebody works full-time, it may not work out. So we're not requiring that the child go to Head Start if that is not the plan for care for that child.
So Tamara, I see your question. If the foster parent is receiving ERDC, is this program for reimbursement a duplicate payment? So it is not intended to be a duplicate payment. It would only be available for a portion that wasn't already covered by ERDC. So for an example, if a foster parent was paying $500 in child care, this is awfully cheap child care, but if say they paid $500 in a month and they were receiving $400 for ERDC, then they could apply for the stipend for up to $100, the $100 that isn't covered by ERDC. So the stipend is intended to be up to $375, but it may not be that full amount. Maybe the foster parent only needs child care for 8 hours a week and is only paying $50 for a total of $200 in the month. So then we would grant that stipend if they met other criteria for up to $200. So it is not intended to be a duplicate payment.
And just to note, ERDC reimburses or pays the child care provider. So they agree on what the amount that they're going to pay. So they pay the child care provider $400, but the cost of care is $700, so the foster parent still has to pay $300. So we can then reimburse them that $300.
So Tamara, I'll give you a second to complete your comment or question, and then we'll move from the foster parent's role in completing this form onto the caseworker's part or their supervisor. Okay, perfect. So the next part would be the caseworker or supervisor, and that would be them signing this. It's very little part of this form. Of course, they could have been completing the foster parent part with the foster parent, but their intent is to review this information for completeness and accuracy and to determine if this does actually meet the stipend requirements. So by signing that, they're saying that yes, the supervision plan meets the child's needs, yes, that this provider is either licensed, listed or approved in some other way through their certifier, and that we want to proceed and authorize this for up to 6 months. So that is all happening by virtue of the person signing and dating this. And then finally, we have, depending on your branch, we have a designated staff person or persons who complete these roles here. And that could be a different person or different role in each branch, so we're just going to leave it as designated staff. But they want to identify and make sure that the child's person ID out of ORCIDS is on there. That would be the number that's at the top left of the child's person management page. If there is a child care provider license number, we would want that to be verified in the middle of that form. And finally, to follow the procedure at the bottom, which lets you know that once this is all completed and signed, this should be printed, scanned into ORCIDS, and then uploaded to the child's file cabinet. So that would be what those designated staff people would be doing. And I see that this is developing some questions. So Jen, you ask, where in the file cabinet will it go? That is a great question, and I will make sure to get that clarified as we send that out. So specifically, what category would we choose? I'm not sure about that, but I will make sure that we have an answer for that in the attachment that's sent. And we'll make sure that's available to people listening to this webinar as well. Brandy, you asked regarding the signature, is the caseworker or the supervisor? It was presented to me as both must sign. Great. Donna, I see that you're shaking your head, so it will be either or. It can be the caseworker or the supervisor, but it does not require both. And then Megan and Shannon, so it goes into the kiddos file and the orchids or the family's provider income. I believe this goes into the child's
child's file, yeah.
So you would select the child as the participant. I know that much. I'm just not sure specifically what the category would be. Great questions. Let's keep those coming. So a little bit more on this form. This would be a sample completed, and we would just want to make sure to verify that provider license number and make sure that's included if it is available. We will have those exceptions if it is somebody who is approved by the certifier. And I did note that the child care provided before the authorization will not qualify for the stipend payments. That has been one of those things that has slightly changed. So here in the month of May, since we're already starting and a lot of people don't know about this, they could be authorized on May 20th and still have child care from the beginning of May covered as part of the stipend as long as they're approved. Tamara, I see your question. The payment reimbursement is being made through Orchids, correct? Yes, it is. And so it would be entered as a one-time payment once we receive that invoice. So we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a second as we move to the invoice.
You guys are just one step ahead of us. You're on it. I love it.
And then, Brandy, you asked, if approved by certification, what would we put in the license no section?
You could just put per certification.
Great. And if certifiers have any questions about that, they can direct those to Donna or to me, and we can get further clarification if there's anything else they need to do. Maybe they enter a provider note, but as long as that's documented on this authorization form, we have the understanding that they have completed that process and that they have been approved by the certifier based on that process they already have in place.
The certification rules. So the background check information will go into the provider's file just like it does now.
Great. And Valerie, it looks like you have a question or a comment, so we'll get that, and then we'll move on to our second form. So all of this information has been about the initial authorization up to this point, and then we're going to move on to the second form, which is the ongoing invoice form, and this would be what we would use to verify that someone has accessed appropriate child care, has made their payment, and now is asking to be reimbursed through our stipend. Somebody had previously asked if there would be a requirement to have any kind of receipts from the child care provider. My understanding from talking with Donna in the past is that this is what we're taking as our proof that payment was made. If there was some need for some kind of audit maybe later on, that would be done separately, but we are not requiring receipts at this time. Is that correct?
We're using this basically as a receipt because the child care provider has to sign this invoice. So they're signing to the fact that they have received the payment from the foster parent or relative caregiver.
So again, we have the section at the top that would be completed by the foster parent. They're going to put their name and their provider number in. So where it says DHS provider number, we're talking specifically about the foster parent because the payment is going to them. So we don't need to create new providers in our system in order to make our payments. We are generating that payment directly to the foster parent after they have certified that they have paid this child care provider. We have the child's name and again their person ID from the person management page. We have the child care provider name, and then the dates that that care was provided, along with any amount that was paid by the foster parent. So that would be the amount that would drive the stipend payment up to $375. And as Donna just mentioned, at the bottom, both the foster parent and the child care provider would sign and date this, and that would verify for us that this child care has been provided and that payment should be made through the stipend. And then we have the caseworker again. It says DHS authorized approver. That's either going to be the caseworker or their supervisor. Again, it doesn't have to be both, but they're going to receive this, review this, and then sign that they approve the stipend payment. Robbie, you asked, does this form need to be filled out every 6 months? I'm so glad you asked that. It actually needs to be filled out every month that they are requesting the stipend payment. So this would be a monthly invoice. It doesn't have to be sent in month by month. They could get this completed and send it in a few months at a time, but it has to be for child care that's already been authorized, already been provided and paid for, and then for a month's worth at a time. So you can send in up to 6 of them without that being reauthorized, but it should not be for more than 1 month. Tamara, you asked, so Tamara, you said caseworkers do not have signature authority.
Signature authority for what?
So where it says DHS authorized approver, that's not a statement that's come up before, so maybe we have to clarify with somebody from central office about that and get back to you.
Yeah, I think they're signing here that they have approved the service and are signing that the service was done as authorized.
So I am going to go ahead and put that on the back burner for right now because I want to make sure we get somebody to weigh in. I'm sorry that question hadn't come up at previous sessions, and so we haven't been able to get clarification on that for this recording, but we will make sure to get someone to weigh in on that. But I can answer Alicia's question. This has come up in a previous session, and we've talked about it. Is there a deadline for submitting these invoices?
You mean for the foster parent to submit it?
Correct.
No, there isn't any guidance that they can't submit it every 4 months instead of every month. You might want to work with your foster parents on having a regular system in place, but that's a branch protocol. Right now, they would be able to submit them at any point. Will these require funding requests like other payments do? I'm not sure what those funding requests look like, but what is required is exactly what we're showing you today. It's that authorization form. That's what authorizes the service. There doesn't need to be any other funding request.
So we will not be using the funding request form as far as I know. There had been discussion about doing a purchase order, but that was one of the things that changed since our last session. So at this point, the only entry around payments would be that one-time payment form. Or page in ORCIDs, and then you would take the authorization number and payment ID from that one-time payment form and enter it in that bottom section here. I'll move to that part right there.
I can answer Sandy's question. Sure. Do the foster parents not get paid until they turn in the invoice, the 501? Exactly. I mean, that's them telling us they've made the payment. So we can't issue a payment until they turn in the invoice.
So Lisa, I see your question there. So this process doesn't necessarily trigger the state's requirement to have payment submittals occur within the month incurred. I don't know that at this time that we're making that requirement. We can look into that further if you have questions around that. But the process that has been developed and approved so far by our central office program management is that there is no requirement right now that the month has to be submitted within that month. I mean, you wouldn't have to have it by May 31st.
So the question again about the receipt, this invoice becomes that receipt. Again, the invoice has to be signed by the child care provider that they received the amount of money that's listed on the form. So in effect, that is the receipt.
Now, Lisa, that is an interesting comment. Also, completing payments within the current biennium, that could become more of an issue. So maybe as we approach the end of our biennium, we would have to be more stringent upon our collection and payment of those stipends at that point. Are we in the middle of a biennium here? We are. We're a year in. So at least for the next several months, that should not be an issue. Maybe towards the end of next spring and early summer, we'll have to pay more attention and see if there's an issue. We don't even know yet if foster parents will delay in getting this in. I don't know about you, but when I have something that can be reimbursed to me, I usually get those in pretty quickly because I generally need the money that I've already paid out. So I'm hoping we'll be evaluating and seeing if this becomes a problem, if people are collecting months at a time and not submitting them in a timely fashion. But there are other things that foster parents are already reimbursed, so I guess we might have a sense of how that's going to go. And Tamara, you asked, is there a certain amount of time that this program is available, or is it intended to be long-term?
At this point, there is no end of the program. There is no, okay, this is a 6-month program, 2-year program. It's a program that's been approved. And so I would say, yes, it is intended to be long-term, but I don't know how long you've worked for the agency, but things change in the agency all the time, so I can't guarantee anything. But as of now, this is the program, and we will be reimbursing foster parents $375 for the cost of child care for children under the age of 6 for their need to go to work.
And I don't know if it's one of those things where if people use it, then it will continue. So I guess just knowing what I do about the agency, I would really encourage people to reach out to foster parents and make sure they're using this stipend if it is something that they would qualify for or their child care provider would qualify for them, because I would hope that it wouldn't go away for lack of use. And we continue to try and get the word out, and hopefully as more people hear about it, they'll use it more. And we also hope that our process that we're developing here isn't going to be some hindrance to people in getting that stipend approved, authorized, and paid. But we do want to provide this to foster parents as a resource, and so I'm hoping that if it's well used, it is one of those things that goes on for a while and maybe even expands. We'll just cross fingers. I don't know of any intention for it to expand, but just saying. And Sarah, you ask, is this going to be presented at orientation for new foster parents?
I can work with PSU and think about what needs to be covered in orientation regarding this. Right now, we're really just trying to get it out the door and get folks who are already using childcare to be able to start getting reimbursed, but that's a great idea.
Awesome. And Lisa, how would you ensure the veracity that the time period being reimbursed was work-related, or are you only accepting based on the word signed form? So Donna, I've heard you mention in one of the previous sessions that certifiers are already verifying employment of the foster parents. Is that correct?
Well, the process for certifying our foster parents have to submit a financial form. They have to talk about their employment. It's written into the home study. I'm not sure. Currently, we're not required to look at wage screens, if that's what you mean, although a wage screen isn't going to tell you the hours a foster parent works. We are basing it off the fact that we know our foster parents, right? Caseworkers know the children, what they do during their day. And so, people could lie, I guess, is the bottom line, but we're going to move forward that we're putting in enough assurances that the foster parent has to sign, the child care provider has to sign. They have to put down who their employer is on that verification form, that would be very few and far between, if at all.
And Megan and Shannon, I see your comment there. We don't verify as far as the employment, but if they lie, they could lose their certification. And hopefully that's something they're aware of and would give enough pause. So Lisa, I do hear your concern, and I think some other people have mentioned some concerns around that verification. It seems to me that this is trying to honor a fine balance between getting enough documentation to feel secure that these services were provided to not becoming an obstacle to accessing that resource. So it does seem like a fine line that we're tiptoeing here, but we do want to make this to be a pretty streamlined process. As Donna has noted, the child care provider does have to sign and date, and this could also affect their certification or licensing if they were to provide false information to the state. So there could be the possibility for auditing. I don't know that that's going to happen, but if people are accessing the service in bad faith, there could be some circumstances or consequences for them. I'm really hoping that this becomes a positive experience for folks. So we will be revisiting. If you do have concerns, please let us know. If you feel like someone is misusing this service, we want to make sure that it is available for others and wouldn't want this to become something in the Oregonian or some public scandal. So certainly people would be interested in hearing if they feel like this is being misused. But I've seen foster parents do some amazing things with the few resources they do have. So I guess I'm moving forward with the positive intent. And Lisa, you asked, since the certifier is the one with the knowledge, would it be beneficial for them to co-sign with the caseworker supervisor? So Donna, I'll certainly put that on our list of parking lot questions to follow up on. At this time, because this process is starting today, I don't know that we could get verification or an update on that right now.
Although the branch could have a process in place however you want it.
Okay.
That's why it's vague in there that says authorization. So again, a certifier isn't going to know that a foster parent worked Monday from 2 to 5. So really that signature isn't that you're saying you know they worked these hours. What you're saying is that what you're signing is that we have authorized this service previously. That's what that's about.
Gotcha. It looks like there's a few other comments or questions, and then we'll move on. I'll actually move to the sample form here. I think there were some other notes. Just make sure that if you are the designated staff person who's going to be uploading this into the file cabinet, that you make sure to capture that authorization number and payment number from the one-time payment before you scan that form in. And again, it's prompting me to realize I need to get information about where that would be captured in the ORCID's file cabinet, and we'll certainly send that out. Jenny, I see or Jen, sorry. So this is something that each office could take as a starting point and tweak it to some extent to what works for them. To some degree, absolutely, there will have to be some kind of branch or district process that's developed. We hope that there wouldn't be too many changes to the policy requirements so that there wouldn't be additional requirements built in, or that you would reach out to Donna or someone at central office if you wanted clarification about other requirements. So I don't know that the intent is for specific branches to build in a receipt requirement or something like that. So
no, it would be more who's looking up to make sure that the child's person number is there. And then again, when we get to the part about verifying the license, who does that is branch specific or district specific. Yeah, absolutely. But if you have questions, like if something comes up and you, like Rebecca said, and you want to add a requirement, I would give me a call or email.
Oh, perfect, Jen. Yeah. So sorry that we are vague around the specific roles of who's going to be doing each of these tasks, but we do recognize that depending on the size of your branch, where people are located, it might be somebody in another branch in your district. So we couldn't say specifically what title or what role would be doing each of these activities, and there will have to be some flexibility on our part around that. And so we do hope as a branch or a district that you are starting those conversations based on the information in this webinar and in that transmittal, just thinking about, oh, who would be the appropriate person or persons in our area to do these activities. And not only the part around the authorization form and the invoice entry, but also here when we're moving on to determining if a child care provider is already licensed, listed through self-sufficiency, or if they would need to be considered by the certifier to be approved in those examples that Donna has already covered. So we're going to look at two different screens. If you had already enrolled in iLearn, as of yesterday, I sent you an email about these screens. Some of you may not have received that, or you signed up later, so I apologize for not getting that to you, but I will send you the URL, the web address for the Child Care Regulatory Information System. It's not one that you can actually Google, so you'll want to make sure to bookmark that or keep that website handy if you are that person. So what I've heard from Donna in our previous conversations is the intent is not that everybody in child welfare will now have to have a registered account with CCRIS, but if you were going to be one of those people in your area who would be checking into these child care providers to see if they are licensed or approved or listed, you would need that account. And just know you need to register one day and then get authorized overnight. So it will be a one-day delay the first time you use it. Additionally, you'll want to make sure your DHR account is activated. If you haven't used it in the last 60 days, I can let you know it's been deactivated. So you'll want to check in with the service desk to make sure that you have access to that. So for the CCRIS page, the first time you'll need to click that new user register here button, do that one night or overnight account authorization, and then you'll come back, you'll enter your email address, your password, and then you will click the login button. I made the mistake of hitting enter the first time I tried to log in as a returning user, and it just cleared my screen and didn't go anywhere. So just make a note somewhere that you will have to click the login button with your mouse instead of clicking enter. And then you'll be taken to the site here. You'll see a note that just like with DHR, if you don't use your CCRIS account within 60 days, it will be deactivated. And then you're going to click the facility search button up there at the top. So then you can search the facility page either by the facility name, or if it's a single provider or family provider, you could enter the last name and first name. And then you'll click the Go button, where you'll be taken to this page with information about the provider. So I searched for Little Flower Childcare Learning Center. This is an actual provider because there were no training records I could use, but this is a current provider, and I would just note this is a great training example because they currently have 2 license applications. The one at the bottom with the license number in a red box is the current license, which actually expired yesterday, and then they have this pending one at the top. I haven't gone back to review this, but you would want to identify the expiration date of this license and see and go back and verify if a new license was approved. Once you verify that there is a license, you'll click that license number hyperlink where it says CF502763, which is the license number for this specific provider, and it will take you to this page. So you can see license number, you'd want to note that on the authorization form, form 0162. And then you would want to check the status, yes it's active, and the expiration date. So there would need to be some kind of verification again if it was going to be somewhere within your 6-month period. Normally you're not going to have to come back and check this within 6 months, or you could just authorize for the expiration date. You don't have to authorize a stipend up to 6 months, but you have a full 6 months if you like. Once you have verified that yes, this person is licensed, you are going to print this page and upload it to the file cabinet along with that authorization form. Any questions about CCRIS? And maybe at this point you're thinking about, would this be you, this person in your office doing this? Is there somebody else you would identify? And Donna, it sounded like maybe you had a comment.
That was going to be my comment.
Okay, very good. So again, this is not intended to be for each and every one of you having to do this. It might be the caseworker. More likely it's one of the business staff. We don't know yet. But it doesn't need to be multiple people in each branch. If you have an account already, we could do a practice right now. Tamara, you asked, what if the provider certification is not active or is pending recertification? So we couldn't use that as authorization at this time. However, you could also look and see if they are listed and or check in with the certifier. So you do have multiple options. This is just one note I'm hearing.
So if this was like a Mary's Childcare, a business,
okay.
You could see if they were listed, but that's not going to be somebody that we're going to be able to use as certification approved because they're not exempt from the requirement of being licensed if they provide childcare as a business for multiple children. The certification folks can only approve someone that the foster parent is using for themselves only.
Oh, I'm really glad you clarified that. So to restate, because I misstated that just a second ago. So to Tamara's question, what if the provider's certification is not active or is pending? So based on what I'm just hearing Donna say, we would not be able to authorize right now. We would have to wait until we have some kind of verification that that license is active.
Yes.
Okay, so in the example I just provided, let me go back to that slide. This would not work right now because they were only certified through the end of April, and we would need to go back and see if their pending license had been approved. Now, because we do have a little bit of leeway within this month, if we could come back next week and verify that that license was now in place, we would then be able to approve that then.
Yes. To answer Tamara's question, we would then be able to provide that reimbursement to the foster parent. I mean, to be honest, the child care provider, if they're providing care without a license, they're going to be in trouble with the Office of Child Care because they can't really do that. But if it gets rectified, yes, we can reimburse that foster parent.
Great. Awesome questions, everybody. I'm really glad that we're able to parse out these very specific scenarios because we know that these are going to arise as we go forward. And I see a few other comments or questions, so I'm going to hold here because we were going to move on to the DHR screens. So Jen, you asked, so what if someone turns in a form from 3 months ago? Is there a way to determine if they were active during the previous months? So just based on that scenario, what I would say is we would have had to do the authorization form, the 162 first, and so we're verifying at that time that they are licensed before we even consider, and we're not going to entertain or accept invoices until we have an authorization form in place. So foster parents should have a conversation at some point with someone about it. You can access childcare as much as you like, but until that authorization form is signed, we are not going to be considering retroactive payments. So they could access foster care from May 1st, but until that we've got that form signed for that month, we will not be able to reimburse them.
Deborah's question is if the provider is giving up his or her business, only going to provide child care for the foster parent, could it then be done through the certification process? And I guess the answer to that would be yes. If they're now going to be exempt from the state requirement of having a license to provide child care. And the intent, however, of the allowing a certifier to do this was specific to our foster parents and relative caregivers who want to use somebody known to them. Most often it's a relative or a close friend. We don't want to take advantage of it and push that too far because that could be taken away from us, and then a foster parent would need to wait for however long it takes to get somebody listed through SSP before they could get reimbursed. So it could take a couple months where they don't get a stipend. So again, really the intent of adding in the child welfare approval is for those foster parents who use somebody in their circle to provide care.
Great. Okay, I see one more comment and then we'll move on. Was anybody actually able to get certified or get, a registered user account through CCRIS yesterday? So Sandy was, Lisa, you asked for clarification since we do need to check the active status. It would be more difficult if they were to submit forms for a 4 to 6 month period, correct?
So can I just take a stab at that?
Oh, okay, sure.
So again, we're verifying the active license not at the point that invoices come in, but at the point that we're approving the service through the 162. So at that point, and they're using Mary's childcare. So we're looking at Mary's childcare. Yes, she's approved and active, and we write that number in there. That's when we're verifying that they have an active license and that it's not going to expire in 2 months or 3 months.
All right. I do see that some people were successfully able to get on the CCRIS system. So I would ask at this point that you go ahead and just give it a try. It looks like a few people just tried that along with me for the little flowers, but see if you can look up and find the license number for the Touchstone School in Tigard. And while you do that, I will speak to Brandy's comment. So it sounds like you got approved for your username. You're getting an error message, so please connect with me offline. And that's true for anyone watching this webinar or this recording later on. My name is Rebecca Monteblanco. You can reach out to me for assistance in all these kind of database questions. So I am definitely a resource for that. So I apologize for that error message for Brandy, and offline we'll make sure to get you connected somehow, especially if this is something you feel like you will be doing routinely for this process. And for everybody out there practicing, again, see if you can type in the chat box, what is the license number for the Touchstone School in Tigard. It looks like a few people have found that. Very nice, Lisa. Oh, we got different numbers. Okay. Well, there are more than one Touchstone School, so I would note that this is the Tigard location. Oh, there we go. Okay. It looks like you found both of them. Very good. And I don't want to take too long, but that's just a note for people watching this as well. They could also do that, that practice on their own. And at this point, I'm going to move on from CCRIS to DHR. Looks like everybody found that number. Nice job for those who were practicing. And at this point, we will move into a different system. So in order to access information, and this would be in order to see if this child care provider is listed with self-sufficiency. Many times they get listed so that they would qualify for ERDC payments. Is that correct? Yes. And so that's why they would be listed here. So that's what we're searching for here, a little bit different than the CCRIS system. What we would do here is from a clear screen, so you would clear the screen either by pressing pause break or that clear button up at the top, and then you would click enter. Now if you're practicing along with me, you may get an error message that you're not authorized. Unfortunately, we've had some issues with our security access team that many people in child welfare seem not to be authorized to this screen, and so we are working with that. If you are one of those people, would you follow up with me after this webinar? That way I can check on your security and we can get that. But again, this is not necessarily a screen that everybody needs authorization to use. We want to identify those people in the branches and districts that routinely will be doing this search, and we'll make sure that they have authorization.
And if it is a licensed provider or approved provider through the Office of Child Care and you find it on that CCRIS screen, you do not need to go to this screen also. This is for, and I think this is going to be not that common now that we're not requiring everyone to become listed. But it could be that somebody, a foster parent, is already using. Perhaps they, as was said early, some of our foster parents do receive ERDC. So maybe they're already using somebody who's listed. So they would be in this database.
So once you type in DPPL and click enter, you get to this screen here, and then you're going to type in the search field the child care provider's name, click tab 2 times, put some letter in the name field, and click enter, which then takes you to this page. So once you have clicked enter, you search for any provider with that name. In our instance here, when you type in Little Flower, you get 2 options. So you're going to tab down to the line that you wish to enter, and you're going to enter that greater than symbol. And finally, you want to view the DPPM screen, and you do that by clicking F17, which is Shift F5. And I'll hold here for a second because it looks like we have a comment or a question. So I don't want to move on until we capture that. And people might just be taking a look at this page, seeing if they have other questions or comments on it. It is not a screen that we've routinely used in child welfare before, so this is a first look for a lot of folks. And I just want to make sure that if there are any questions that we clarify those before we move on. All right, thanks for letting us know. So once you've clicked F17, this takes you to the DPPM, or the provider, or the non-medical provider data page. In this page, there are a few things we want you to direct your attention to. First is the DHS approval date. So for instance, with the Little Flower Childcare, the approval date is September 15th, 2017. And it's important, 1, that there is a date in that field, and 2, that it be before the date that we're trying to authorize this child care stipend. So for instance, if we came to this date and it said June 1st, 2018, we could not use this to show that they were listed before that date. Now, if they had already had their license verified in the CCRIS system, doesn't matter. But if they're not in the CCRIS system, we need to come here and make sure this date predates the date that we're looking to start that child care stipend. Additionally, we want to make sure that they're listed as A for active. So this is an active listing, it's approved. And finally, you would note that OCC number, that is their child care number. This does happen to match the license number that was in CCRIS, so it should be the same if you do see them in both sections. But just draw your attention to that DHS approval area, the list status, and the OCC number. So this is the number you would put on the authorization form. And you would also print this screen and upload it just the way you had if you were going to use the CCRIS page. And I see we have another comment or question, so we'll hold here and people can just take a look at this page, get familiar with it. Cindy, you ask, if I don't have access, do I need to go to my supervisor to get access? If you want DHR access, you should already have an account. I would ask your office manager if you don't know what your RACF ID is, so RACF. That's what you'll use to log in here. It will not be your OR number. So you will also, while you're asking, might just ask your office manager if they would expect that you would be the person doing the search. If not, you may not need this search. Oh, it says you're not authorized. Okay, perfect, Cindy. If you would just send me a little note offline and I can check with our security office to see why you don't have that access at this time. For those people who do have access, actually I was going to do some practice, but what I found is pretty much routinely nobody has access besides me, and I don't understand that. But this is just a summary of all those steps that we showed in the previous few slides, and this will come out with that PowerPoint, so you could just pull the slide out, follow those steps if you are going to be that designated person to do this. Very easily, you type in DPPBL, click enter, and etc. So you will have lots of support in researching these screens if you are that designated person. Otherwise, you don't need access to the screen, and maybe you're relieved at this point. That's okay. So we've covered already those two screens, CCRIS. We've covered DHR. We've talked about the exceptions when you could connect with a certifier, maybe for a relative who will be providing childcare just for that foster care provider or relative caregiver. We've talked about the changes to rule, and we talked about the forms. Lisa, you notice it's based on required authorizations. There were 6 different stages plus other points that were exceptions when I spoke with my OM this morning. Okay, well, I'll definitely follow up on that after our webinar, so I appreciate you clarifying that, and we'll continue to look in how we get the right people the right authorization to do this process. So I had previously put in some screens on ORCIDs, but it turns out that our process has now changed, and the requirement in ORCIDs is that once we have received the invoice and it's been signed by the appropriate authorizing person, then it is going to be entered as a one-time payment. And so I can follow up with people if they would want a resource on how to enter a one-time payment, but most people watching this webinar will not need that. So I'm going to move on now to just walking through the workflow or the work process from beginning to end for this stipend. So to recap many of the things we've talked about already, it starts with a foster parent either completing or working with the caseworker to complete Form 162, our authorization form. The caseworker or their supervisor is then going to sign the form and pass that off to the designated staff person. That designated branch staff person is going to confirm that the provider is licensed through CCRIS, that they're listed through the DHR screen, or that they've been approved through that process with the certifier. Once they've done that, that designated branch person is going to print off the appropriate screen, or if there's an email or case note from the certifier, they could attach that, and then they will scan that and upload that to the child ORCID's file cabinet. Once that has happened, the child has gone to childcare, the foster parent has paid the childcare provider, they are then going to submit the invoice with their signature and the childcare provider's signature. The designated staff person is going to create the one-time payment. They're going to note that authorization and payment number on the invoice form, and then that invoice form will be uploaded to the ORCID's file cabinet. Any questions on those steps? Okay, some questions or comments are coming. All right. This is great because this is the best venue we have in order to address those. So Angela, you asked, who tracks the 6 months? Well, originally we were going to have a purchase order in place for that, but then we were informed that you could not have a 6-month purchase order. So at this time, we're going to have to develop some kind of creative thinking at the branch level around tracking that 6 months. So maybe if you have some ideas around how that could best be done, you could, if you were the person initiating the authorization, set a 6-month tickler out There could be some other ways to do that. Maybe when you're entering the one-time payment, you're verifying that it's one of those 6 months. Brandy asked, will this also be approved for CPS cases, not just permanency? I don't know that there's any, well, it's around foster care.
Right, it applies to all children who are placed in foster care. So it has to be an out-of-home case, children under 6, working foster parents. So it doesn't matter where in the life of the case it is within our system.
Gotcha. And then I think we have a few more, okay, questions. It seems we would want a copy of the payment receipt to verify along the child care provider's signature. I will certainly be happy to pass along the concern around the receipt, but what I'm hearing is that from the well-being program at this point, it is not an expectation. So I appreciate people wanting to be good stewards of the state resources and make sure that we're using that appropriately.
That's why we require the that's why we require the child care provider to sign, because it's just like they're signing a receipt as well. So whereas a receipt isn't signed by a foster parent. So we're having a foster parent sign, and we're having the child care provider sign that invoice. But we can look at that moving forward if there seems to be concern moving forward.
Okay, so Tamara, I see your comment on the financial side. We have to show documentation to justify the amount for everything else.
So we have the authorization form that's signed that says that we're going to authorize $375 a month for up to 6 months. And then we have the invoice, which really does act as a receipt that we're going to reimburse the foster parent. And again, we can relook at this moving forward, but that's where we're at this point.
Sure, we'll be happy to ask. At this point, we won't be able to give you an answer during this webinar, so we'll have to follow up on that offline. And we have made some changes to this process based on previous sessions, to be sure. I would just note that program managers from central office have reviewed this process, and so we are having to report during this webinar the information that was provided to us based on those program managers and the development of this process. But there are lots of different ins and outs and specific information for all of our different roles that we may not be privy to. So I appreciate your concern, and we'll certainly pass that on. Jackie, I see that you've mentioned that you have another worker here with you. We are pretty much at the end of our webinar, and we have captured those different questions that have come up and that we'll have to answer offline. But this is a good time, as Jackie has, to mention if there are other people attending with you who have not been noted already. So to recapture what we've gone over today, hopefully at this point you can identify the branch responsibilities and the responsibilities of the foster parent or relative caregiver, that you would be able to determine if the child care provider is licensed through CCRIS, listed with SSP, or has been given some kind of approval through the certifier in those specific exceptions, that you can locate and complete Form 162 and Form 501F, and that you are able to identify resources that are available to assist in any kind of questions. So we do have a few questions to answer offline. We'll send those along with these resources out at the end of this training. This is not going to be scheduled again. That's why we're recording this webinar right now, but we will find a way to get some answers out for the questions, so not only for the people on this webinar, but anyone who might be listening in the future. So if you'd like to come back and review this, this should be posted as a recording to iLearn within a few business days here. Additionally, you can always reach out to Donna or to me. I will be your contact specifically around screens and ORCID's questions. Donna has a lot of the policy answers and can track down other answers as are needed. We really appreciate your active participation and really your thoughtfulness in considering this process today and helping us make it the best process that it can. And at this point, we are going to wrap up a little bit early, but we appreciate you being here with us. We hope that you will reach out to foster parents if you're one of those people that has contact with them. Let them know that this process is available, and help us toe the line and make sure that we meet all the state policy requirements in completing this process. Are there any parting comments or questions that we can consider as we're wrapping up here? So Lisa, you say you will email all of the trainees the information, the PowerPoint? Absolutely. So oh, I do too, Julie. You're the first person who said that. I worked really hard on those. I like goats in pajamas. But yes, I will stop being distracted and get back to, we will be sending out the PowerPoint slides. We will be sending out a flyer with some important points about the training that everybody can use, can talk about with other caseworkers or with foster parents. And then we will also be outlining answers to some of the questions that came up. Deborah, you asked, how are foster parents getting the word? Do you want to talk to that again?
Sure. So I met with a committee, it's the foster parent support committee, and they took the information and were putting it on their social media websites, Facebook pages, that sorts of things. And I've actually seen it come around onto my Facebook page, so it's moving around, so that's great. We're sending an email out to foster parents, and then we are word of mouth after that. I know there are some foster parents that maybe don't use email much, but the vast majority do, and we have pretty good updated lists. So we're going to send a newsletter out with the information. We're getting the information out on their social media, and we're hoping that caseworkers and certifiers who know that they have working foster parents will be talking to them about this.
So Heather, you asked, do you have a flyer that you could share? So the flyer that we're sending, would that be appropriate to give to foster parents as well?
Absolutely.
Oh, great. Okay. So,
Heather, that would be great. You'll get a flyer, and you'll be able to recognize it right away as a flyer. Somebody talented, not me, in our unit, made it pretty and look like a flyer, but that's very appropriate to share with foster parents.
And for folks who are listening to this webinar as a recording after May 1st, you're not on the live recording, we will find it somewhere to post that online or make it available so that you don't have to be here in the specific session but can always access that later on. We don't have that location for you right now, but we'll make sure to post that in a place and notify the field where that is available. So not just the folks attending the session, but everyone will be able to have that. Thank you all so much. Have a wonderful afternoon, and we wish you the best in working with foster parents to provide them additional resources. Everybody take care.